I'm John Perry, and with me is Ken Taylor.
And our guest is Lanier Anderson. He's a professor of philosophy at Stanford University. He's a resident expert on all things 19th century and philosophical. Lanier, welcome back to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Lanier, tell us briefly how your love of 19th century philosophy in general, and Kierkegaard in particular, came to be. Some sort of softness for lost causes?
I don't think that was quite it. With Kierkegaard in particular, I started reading it just because I had to teach it in a class. And then I really got into it because it reminded me, or it helped explain to me, something about the weird inner logic of the faith of people that I knew when I was growing up.
Well, give us a little more background on Kierkegaard. What motivated this strange fellow, and what were his most important doctrines in a nutshell, no pun intended?
Well, I think he was mainly worried about certain alienating effects of modern life, and especially ones attached to the decay of commitment to our traditional religiously motivated lifeways. And maybe there are two main areas where that came out. Kierkegaard was deeply opposed to the Hegelian project of explaining how the world is fundamentally rational and how it could be justified in terms that everybody can understand. And he was also very upset about the sort of terrorization of religious consciousness. He was worried that people made things too easy for themselves.
Wait a minute. So he's worried about the deep alienation of alienating aspects of modern life, but I take it this Hegelian reason thing is supposed to make us at home in the world because it's rational through and through, and religion has a rational basis, and it would be good if Christianity were easy rather than hard, because that would be accessible rather than inaccessible. So that all sounds kind of paradoxical.
Maybe we should just say we're talking about Georg Hegel, who was a rough contemporary of Kierkegaard and who was, the German philosopher for the 19th century.
I mean, doesn't Kierkegaard make us more alienated in some ways?
Well, he thinks that the Hegelians are making things way too easy for themselves by thinking that everything in the world is going to turn out to be rational and okay. And let's go back to that case of Abraham, right? Kierkegaard wants us to realize that if God is not going to be, and God's commands are not going to be just irrelevant to our ethical life, then it must be possible for God to command us to do something that's against what reason would suggest. And that's what happens in the Abraham case. And, Hegel is just trying to push that under the rug.
Right. So religion has to be hard. Faith has to be beyond reason. It has to be hard for us to come, and then we're more at home in the world. That's the part I don't get. Because you said you worried. He said he was deeply worried about alienation. But it sounds like I don't understand why he doesn't make us more alienated. But I'm going to ask you to hold that thought and tell us why we're not more alienated in the Kierkegaardian picture than we start out with. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're discussing Kierkegaard with Lanier Anderson.
We've been getting a brief overview of this enigmatic but important philosopher. In the next segment, we're really going to focus on his concept of a leap of faith. So take a leap yourself. Give us a call, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. And you can also send us email at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Faith leaping, plus your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Bob Dylan's retelling of the story of Abraham, the classic biblical leap of faith. It was Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, theologian, and psychologist, who talked about the leap of faith and how it was necessary for belief in or true love of God, or, matter of fact, any kind of true love, perhaps. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor, and this is Philosophy Talk. Have you ever taken a leap of faith? How? In what context? What does it take to make that leap? Courage, folly, or something else? The number is 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest today is Lanier Anderson from Stanford's Philosophy Department.
So, Lanier, I want to go back. Eventually, I want to get back to the question I was asking you before the break about alienation and how this is supposed to make us more at home in the world. But let's dig into this concept of a leap of faith, because I think that'll help us lay some groundwork. I told John a leap of faith is when you inwardly accept an act in a paradox, something you don't understand, but you believe and act anyway. Is that basically right, or how would you characterize that?
I think that is basically right. it's a special attitude that you take toward this paradoxical demand or paradoxical object of belief, paradoxical content, and it's important in important ways. It's defined by contrast to a rational belief in that thing. When you believe on the basis of faith, for Kierkegaard, it's in a way that goes against what reason would demand of you. And I think that the roving philosophical segment was on to something in focusing on that case about love. So imagine that you're trying to say that you're in love with a person, and you come to your partner and you say, well, I'm in love with you for 3 or 4 reasons, and here they are, I enumerate them. As soon as you do that, you're testifying against yourself that you're not really in love. If you're really in love, then your attitude of love, your feeling of love, way outstrips any reasons that you could give, and it's that sort of thing that Kierkegaard's thinking faith should be like.
Okay, so let me make a contrast here. There was another famous anti-Hegelian, Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's idea was a world is will and idea. And will was this primordial thing that pushes us to do things that are really stupid. Like if he were living today, he would say, why do you want to get married? They almost all end in divorces or unhappiness. Why do you want to have children? They'll soak up all your money, right? That's the will, right? Manipulating your ideas, which are an illusion, and leading you to do things you shouldn't do. Now, is there kind of a deep analogy there with Kierkegaard? He thinks we also have this deep primordial need, but he kind of approves of it. I mean, they both look at the irrational, and Schopenhauer says that's your will playing a trick on you, and Kierkegaard says no, that's the essence of Christianity. Take your leap, have your children, get married. Which, by the way, he chickened out of his marriage, if I remember correctly.
That's true, he did, and you might think of his whole philosophy as a retrospective way of explaining to himself why he did and what went wrong and how he failed to have enough faith to carry through with that.
So, just so our listeners will have the facts, he had a fiancée. They seemed to be Regina Olsen. They seemed very much in love. He backed out kind of at the last moment. Then she ended up marrying someone else, and that drove him crazy for the rest of his life. That's my take on it.
Well, he started writing even before she got together with the other guy, trying to explain to her and himself, I think, why he couldn't go through with it. But really, to contrast Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard thinks that there are 2 different kinds of non-rational attachments that we might have to projects or to things in the world. The ones that are based on mere desire, he might even agree with Schopenhauer that they're really bad, and that they should be overcome by our reason. And our reason gives us ethical rules that help us to live in a way that detaches us from these mere desires. But the thought is that even these rational ethical rules are themselves not everything, and that there's a further attitude of faith that goes beyond them and that puts us directly into a relationship with God, and that's what we're really called to do.
Right. Okay. So look, let's get back to Abraham. Just Kierkegaard wrote a book, Fear and Trembling, which is a constant meditation on Abraham and the paradox of Abraham and the paradox of faith, which is, I think, a really fine book. It's dense and thick, but it's a beautiful book. So look, let's get back to Abraham, though. Abraham was called to kill Isaac or sacrifice Isaac, and it's just, this inner voice says, I guess, kill Isaac. And the leap of faith is, I guess, going ahead and killing Isaac, being ready to kill Isaac, despite the fact that everything that reason says don't do that.
Isaac being his own son.
His own son, who he got out of faith, I guess, because God promised him Isaac, and now God's going to take him back. If God said, kill Isaac, whom I promised you, I'd say, are you really God? Why should I believe you? Isn't this leap of faith just a form of like schizophrenia or something like that?
Well,
thought insertion, this strange voice talking to you.
It does seem very strange. So Kierkegaard has a nice way of talking about this. He points out that the ethical description for what Abraham is asked to do is to murder his own son. The religious description of what he's asked to do is that he's asked to sacrifice the very best to God. So in one sense, what's really going on with the leap of faith is whether you can contain your anxiety enough to adopt the religious interpretation of what you're being asked to do. If the leap of faith just is thinking of the thing religiously and not as a murder.
Right. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about Kierkegaard with Lanier Anderson. We're talking right now about the leap of faith. And we want to know, have you made a leap of faith? Would you make a leap of faith? Small leaps of faith? Big leaps of faith? Give us a call. 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or as always, you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. Okay, let's dig into this a little bit more.